Hello, folks. Welcome back. The Ekurhuleni expropriation without compensation case, the situation that Cyril Ramaphosa lied to President Trump and said isn't happening in South Africa. Of course, this happened in 2019. It's only now coming to the public's attention because it's going to become a test case for the illegal, immoral Expropriation Without Compensation Act, which violates Section 25 of South Africa's Constitution, using the excuse that the government has a responsibility under Section 26 to right historical wrongs. But one section of the Constitution does not negate the other. So it's utter nonsense. But Sakalika says that they have informed the American embassy. Well, I appreciate them doing that formally, but trust me, the U.S. government is well aware of this situation. LaRue said that he confirmed to MoneyWeb this week that Sakalika had alerted the U.S. Embassy and trade representatives from other countries about expropriation without compensation. Now, for their part, the South African Property Owners Association, SAPOA, their CEO, Neil Gopal, says the association has taken keen interest in the matter, but has not joined this case as of yet. Will they join it? Well, I wouldn't hold my breath on that because Gopal says that they support land redistribution and reform to redress past historical imbalances, and says unless there's significant reform and redistribution within the property sector, the entire sector could be at risk. So what Mr. Gopal is saying is that some lawful, legally acquired landowners who got their land legally must surrender their land so that Richie Riches can stay rich. You follow the logic here? So why is SAPOA interested in the redistribution of land? Why isn't SAPOA talking to the South African government, which is sitting on nearly 3 million hectares of land that they bought through the willing buyer, willing seller purchase plan and have failed to distribute to South Africans? Why is SAPOA being a convenient idiot for the ANC, the EFF, and MK by perpetuating this myth of land redistribution? South Africans don't want farmland. Some do. Most don't. South Africans want prosperity, and prosperity is not putting 40 million black South Africans into subsistence farming. That's not the answer. Putting 1 million into subsistence farming is simply a recipe for perpetual poverty. This is utter nonsense, and this stupidity that organizations that are supposed to represent property owners perpetrate in South Africa is ludicrous. There have been 30 years to right the historical wrongs. But the problem is the argument and the goalposts have shifted. The CODESA Summit, the Convention for Democratic South Africa, the agreement was reached that land claims would not go back before 1910. Now, why was that? Because there was no country of South Africa before 1910. Before that, you had a collection of African kingdoms and Boer republics and British colonies, all amalgamated into the Republic of South Africa, into South Africa, under the British Dominion in 1910 with the Union South Africa Act. Therefore, the correct decision was made that everything prior to that is lost to the sands of history through conquest or occupation or colonization by Bantus and by Europeans. And that was the right decision. But now, 30 years later, we want to play this game that the whites have no business being in Africa. If we're going to play that game, then the blacks have no business being in South Africa. Leave it to the Khoi, leave it to the San, and by extension, the colors, most of whom have Khoi and San blood and DNA. So this nonsense from organizations that are supposed to represent property owners in South Africa is disheartening. Those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. Well, what we're having happen now is in South Africa, these organizations ostensibly there to protect lawful property owners are not there for that purpose. They're there for their own enrichment, self-aggrandizement. They're not protecting you by playing along with this narrative that land has to be redistributed. Land won in the 6 Boer Xhosa Wars is land that was won. It's land that's lost. You're not going to re-adjudicate that. You can re-adjudicate anything since 1910. That's fair and legitimate. Prior to that, it's utter nonsense. And remember, it wasn't just blacks and coloreds and Indians removed from their homes. No, it was also whites who removed their land taken from them in places, for instance, like Northwest, so that Bophuthatswana could be created. And they, of course, were at least compensated and relocated to places like KwaZulu-Natal. So they came out better than others, but that doesn't mean that they weren't moved forcibly by the apartheid government. So this nonsense that land is the key to prosperity is beyond stupid. America is wealthy not because Americans are property owners. There are 330 million Americans. I don't own any land. I'm not farming. I'm not starving. I applied my brain and learned and adapted, which is what most people do. Owning land is not the path to wealth. In fact, in America, it's often a path to poverty because state authorities tax you to death with taxes on land. And so owning land is a millstone for many people. It's one of the biggest expenses for farmers is paying taxes on land, and it's crippling in many places. So this nonsense is ridiculous. Now, Gopal emphasized it's inappropriate to categorize commercial property as unproductive. Well, I agree. It's also inappropriate to categorize any property as unproductive. The fact that someone lets land lay fallow doesn't mean that someone has a right to steal it and use it for whatever purposes they want. You let land lay fallow on purpose so that it regenerates or that it accrues in value. This nonsense that speculative investors invest in land where there's a high risk and potentially high return. Everyone who invests in land is speculating. Everyone who buys a car and intends to keep it for a collector's item is investing in speculation. Anyone who buys coins is investing in speculation. That's the nature of life. You hope for a value increase of the thing you've purchased. It's just utter nonsense. These people need to knock it off. Now, Gopal is correct about one thing, and here he's standing up for South Africans. He says the contention that land which is held for purely speculative purposes could be expropriated for nil compensation is dangerous and incorrect. Well, that could be applied to all land that's being expropriated. And this situation in Ekurhuleni dates to 2019. 30 million rand is the value that the company asked for their land, and they've never been paid that. The city responded by saying, we pay you zero compensation. Well, that's land theft, and they've gotten away with it for years. That land remains fallow, as I understand it, still not in use. So what was gained by this? Nothing, except enriching the pockets of caters for votes, saying they're doing something for the poor. How about you fix education? How about you remove your racist laws that crush entrepreneurialism, that crush drive, that crush business acumen, and allow South Africans, black, white, and brown, to succeed on their own merits? Then your economy can flourish. Then, if your education is fixed, people can enter the workplace and do things in the fourth industrial revolution. That's the secret to success, not this nonsense. Wow. Now, Gopal does say some other things that are very helpful here. So obviously he does have some interest in landowners at heart. He says international law does not permit expropriation without compensation. Exactly. South Africa is a rogue pariah state with expropriation without compensation. The fact that the world has not come down in a heavy hand and condemned South Africa is very telling. It shows you that most of these governments around the world are controlled by leftists who don't care about the rights of the individual. There are socialists and communists who think that the collective is what matters. They're like ants. And they are like ants. But the leftists in power are more like locusts that consume everything and produce nothing. And then cry that nothing's there. And then, of course, naturally, if it fails, if nothing works, what's the answer? Racism, of course. It must be those evil white people who invented everything. They're the ones who are responsible for this, because now they're not inventing anything else. They must be doing it out of spite. No, they're doing it because they're dead. They've starved to death, or you've chased them away. Morons. Anyway, folks, the Ekurhuleni case and expropriation without compensation is getting some international attention, and that's good for South Africans. Let's hope that this continues. Cheers.